Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and today we have a very common and popular subject for entrepreneurs, content creators, and creators of all kinds. And that is managing the emotions around copycats. So this is not going to get into things like legal aspects, which are certainly valid and worth exploring, but more so the psychological and emotional components that happen for us as creators when we notice that somebody has copied our work or is seeming to try to emulate our work, whether it is intentional or unintentional. So it is a very natural and human response to experience annoyance and even anger when we see something like this happening. And there's a whole spectrum ranging from someone doing a direct plagiarism and exactly copying, which obviously makes it seem far more intentional, all the way to things that just seem very similar or have similar themes. And I do believe that in some cases those can be unintentional because many of us are consuming similar content. We may be listening to similar podcasts, we may be following similar other creators, we may be reading the same books and getting inspired by some of the same things. There's also the collective unconscious, and so there can be kind of a soup that we're all swimming in and potentially forming similar conclusions after reflecting on various different things that are happening. So I think it is important to keep that in perspective because not all things that come out that seem to be similar are necessarily an intentional copy, although that does happen as well. So asking why does this seem to happen and what might be some of the motivations and incentives for other people doing this? Well, our brains are actually wired for imitation through our mirror neuron system. This is something that we develop as very young children where we mirror and emulate our parents or other adults that we observe doing things, and that's actually how we learn initially. And it's not unusual at all when you are trying to learn something new to sort of copy what you're seeing happening out in the world before eventually making it your own. Very early budding artists and writers will frequently emulate the styles of their favorite musicians and artists and writers as they are learning and developing the trade and learning and developing their own skills and unique approach. Now, the mirror neuron system is a crucial survival mechanism that we all have. It's based around learning, social cohesion, and evolution. And copying feels like a reduction in risk versus trying something that's completely new. Certainly not to say that that makes it okay or to justify it, but simply to better understand where that motivation may stem from. There are also some social innate drives to evaluate ourselves against comparison with others. Not always necessarily healthy, and obviously in many cases very unhealthy. We also tend to compare ourselves most frequently to those whom we perceive as being similar to us. So we may be less likely to experience jealousy or comparisonitis from someone who seems very different, either because they are very far advanced from us or they seem very different in some other way where the comparison just really isn't there. We're much more likely to draw comparisons to someone else that does similar work or seems to have a similar background or something else that we kind of relate to. Now, many people have imposter phenomenon and a lack of overall self-efficacy. They have a low creativity drive, and that can often drive imitation. They have a fear of originality, which may be linked to their own perfectionism and their own fear of failure. And additionally, something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is they may be unable to recognize the complexity behind someone else's success. So for example, if you have a very successful person who happens to do their art or their writing or their products in a particular way and they are successful, the observer might make the false assumption that their success is purely connected to that certain type of style, and then end up copying that style. When in reality, success has to do with a lot of different components, as most of us who have been doing creation for a while really understand that it isn't just being creative, unique, edgy, and thoughtful. There are also components to understanding your market really well, knowing your audience really well, having adequate emotional, financial, and time support, as well as a little bit of luck. And so there are many different components that actually go into a person's success. Particular style or talent is only one aspect. Now, it's interesting because early on in my experience, prior to becoming an entrepreneur and content creator, I had some very difficult and painful experiences with being copied in my personal life. And that was due primarily to jealousy, which unfortunately at the time I didn't initially realize. But I think that having had that experience that was so difficult early on actually became protective for me when I became an entrepreneur and a content creator and ultimately had that experience of feeling like maybe this is someone kind of copying my style or trying to do some similar things. It actually didn't bother me very much, and instead I recognized it immediately as someone who is an admirer of my work. And while it still can be very uncomfortable, I think that reframing it in that way can be extremely beneficial, because ultimately that's what it is. It's either jealousy or admiration or some combination therein. They wouldn't be copying your work and your style if they didn't think that it was really good. If they didn't think it was really cool and creative and cutting edge, they wouldn't bother to copy you. And the other component that I think has been very beneficial for me is to understand that even if someone were to copy my work, they can't be me. They don't have my background, my knowledge, my education, my thoughtful, reflective insights, my capacity to break down and analyze material and information in the way that I do. They won't have my creativity. They won't have my ideas or my brain. And therefore, no matter how fast they run, they will never catch up to me. And eventually, anybody who is sort of doing that as they're learning, they're going to eventually develop their own style and branch off. So while it can still be disarming to have the experience of being copied, I think that it can also be reframed in a more constructive way to minimize your emotional response to it. You can create psychological distance and reduce any emotional reactivity, while obviously at the same time protecting anything that you need to in terms of copyrights and trademarks and all of those legal pieces that, as I mentioned, are relevant but not something we're focusing on here. You can allow for yourself to have a more strategic response instead of becoming upset or frustrated or angry or annoyed, and having a very strong sense of your own creative identity provides a buffer against some of those feelings and threats. Ultimately, I notice myself mostly just feeling sorry for or even pitying people who feel the need to copy other people. And I do find it particularly egregious and completely unnecessary when it is someone who has a big platform and a larger audience copying from somebody who is a much smaller enterprise, because that is truly a power dynamic differential that is deeply unfair. And so I look at this more as being more forgiving when you're talking about someone who's new and small and just getting started. They are desperately unconfident, desperately trying to learn, and certainly not to excuse that behavior. But I do think it's worse when there's someone who's well established copying from someone who is not. It is largely because of their own lack of trust in themselves, in their own abilities, their own lack of resilience, their own lack of creativity, their own lack of ability to conjure fresh and exciting and juicy new ideas out of the ethers in the way that a creator must do. We must be capable of peeling back the tangible world, diving into the abstract world, extracting from that world what we must in order to create something new. And if you are not in touch with those ethers, you will be incapable of creating anything new or interesting and will only ever be a copy of someone else. And so, innovative, ingenious creator. You need not worry about your copycats. They will never touch you. They will never be you. They will only ever be a sad, sad copy. And that's just not very exciting. So I hope you found this to be helpful and insightful. And if you are interested in a little dash of mindset support, some EFT tapping, some hypnosis to kind of help you to transmute any difficult or challenging emotions you may be having, you can always have a peek at my mindset membership. All the details are in the show notes. And until next time, I wish you the most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at transformcreate.com.